I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Senator Dick Durbin railed against weekend shootings in Chicago, Southern California, Houston, and Buffalo on the Senate floor Monday. Durbin had a message for the families of the shooting victims. You do not grieve alone. America grieves with you. The Illinois Democrat blasted the Senate for not passing gun reform legislation, asking, quote, "How many more lives will be lost before we act?" Here's more from the Majority Whip.
President, let me join the Majority Leader in best wishes to our colleague, Chris Van Hollen. Came as a surprise this morning, but we are heartened by the news that he's recovering, and we hope he will be back with us very, very soon. He's a wonderful senator representing his state effectively, and he's very close to members on both sides of the aisle. So we wish him and his family all the strength and recovery as quickly as they can. Madam President, it was another weekend of bloodshed and loss in America. In Chicago, 5 people were shot dead, including a 16-year-old boy killed near the Bean, which those of us in Chicago know automatically is that site in Millennium Park where people race to gather and take photographs. It's one of the most popular attractions in our city. And yesterday, just last weekend, it was the scene of a murder, one teenager killing another. In California yesterday, a gunman walked into a church, opened fire, killing one person, critically wounding 4 others. That same afternoon, another gunman opened fire on a flea market in Houston, killing 2 and injuring 3. A weekend in America. But both of these mass shootings happened less than 24 hours after a white supremacist massacred innocent shoppers at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York. The shooter was wearing tactical gear, carrying an AR-15 assault rifle, a weapon designed to kill people. He shot 13 people, 11 of whom were black, in an act of racist violence. 10 of the victims died. Each of these 10 people had left home Saturday, maybe to grab dinner, buy groceries for the week, and they never returned. Now their families are facing the unimaginable trauma of loss. In an instant, they lost a grandparent, a child, a spouse. To those families, I say, you do not grieve alone. America grieves with you. One of the victims was Aaron Salter. He was a retired police officer working as a security guard at the grocery store when it was attacked. Officer Aaron Salter was a hero. When the gunman entered the store, Officer Salter didn't flinch. He leapt into action to save the lives of the shoppers and employees. But there was only so much he could do. He was armed with a handgun, while the person who attacked the store was wearing a tactical vest and firing an assault rifle. Like so many of our police who risk their lives for us every day, Officer Salter was outgunned. As we mourn Officer Salter's loss this week, our nation's capital is welcoming law enforcement from across the country for Police Week. To every officer who protects our communities, like Officer Salter did so valiantly, we give our thanks. No officer should ever find themselves in a situation where they're outgunned by an assailant. But that's exactly what happened in Buffalo this weekend and happens far too often in cities like Chicago. For decades, this Senate has failed to pass legislation that would close the gaping holes in our gun laws and reduce the shootings that tear apart law enforcement families and families of all kinds across the country. How many more lives will be lost before we act? And when will the members of the Senate finally join together in recognizing the role that white supremacy and white nationalism have played in fueling these violent terrorist attacks? Time and again, I've made my position on violent extremism as clear as I can. The use of violence to advance political goals is always unacceptable, no matter the ideology, right or left. It's wrong. But we need to be clear-eyed about the nature of the threat that we face. Senior law enforcement and intelligence officials have warned us on numerous occasions that the biggest terrorism threat in America today is homegrown. It stems from white supremacists and violent militia extremists. I've been sounding this alarm for years. In 2012, 2012, 10 years ago, I first held a hearing on domestic terrorism after a white supremacist murdered 7 Sikh worshipers in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. Today, a decade later, the threat is even worse. FBI Director Wray testified to the Judiciary Committee that the threat of domestic terrorism is, quote, metastasizing across the country. And last year, the FBI reported that our nation experienced the highest level of hate crimes in over a decade. These attacks have targeted Black Americans, who have long been the target of the majority of race-based hate crimes in America. But they are not limited to just our Black American neighbors. They have also targeted Muslim Americans, Japanese Americans, members of the AAPI community, and members of other marginalized communities as well. They don't happen in a vacuum. And it's clear that influential figures on the right have been fanning the flames of hate. The gunman who attacked the grocery store in Buffalo was an adherent of the, quote, great replacement theory, a conspiracy theory that fuels white supremacy and white nationalism. It's the same white supremacist conspiracy theory that inspired those neo-Nazis to march through Charlottesville, Virginia, chanting, "Jews will not replace us." You remember that group. President Trump said at the time he wasn't sure that they were out of line. And they've inspired multiple mass shootings, including the attack of Jewish Americans at a Pittsburgh synagogue in 2018, on Hispanic Americans at a Walmart in El Paso in 2019, and Muslims at 2 New Zealand mosques in 2019 as well. This once fringe conspiracy theory, this so-called great replacement theory, has been dragged into the mainstream by media personalities like Fox TV's Tucker Carlson. According to the New York Times, more than 400 episodes of Tucker Carlson's news program on Fox TV, which attracts more viewers than any other show in the history of cable news, have alluded to the great replacement theory. Tucker Carlson is a leading ideologue in the white supremacist movement. He's even introduced racist terminology into America's conversation, like the phrase, quote, legacy Americans, which refers to the idea that immigrants aren't real Americans. The phrase was first used on white supremacist forums and websites. Tucker Carlson is right at home with it. But here's what's most shocking to me. The number of elected officials who will jump at any chance to get featured on Carlson's show and echo his white supremacist blather, his dark gospel of fear and hate and racism. We don't have to look far to find those elected officials. The third-ranking House Republican claimed in a campaign ad that Democratic immigration policies will, quote, overthrow our current electorate. What will it finally take for the Republican Party to condemn this hate once and for all? And what will it take for members of the Senate to join together in rooting out white supremacist violence? As chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I'll soon hold a hearing on domestic terrorism. And the ideologies like the great replacement conspiracy theory that inspire the acts of hate will be expounded on at that hearing by experts. We'll also examine a piece of legislation that I introduced 5 years ago, the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act, which would strengthen federal efforts to prevent and address white supremacist violence and other forms of domestic terrorism. This legislation is an opportunity for the members of the Senate to stand united against hate. By passing it, along with common sense gun safety measures, we can finally address the scourge of hate and violence that has claimed far too many American lives. Many Americans will be tuned in this week to Tucker Carlson's show to see if he has any reaction to what happened in Buffalo. Could it be that for one shining moment, he will finally realize his complicity in what happened? 400 shows spewing fear and hate, subscribing this great replacement theory, resulted in hatred across this country, which is visited on communities every single day. 10 people died in Buffalo. Will Tucker Carlson take 10 minutes to say he's sorry for any role he might have played in that outcome? we'll see. I yield the floor.